Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Now, I know that we've had a dry winter and spring, and that for a lot of people, that's caused problems. But I have to say, here at Longmeadow, it's been a joy, because normally it's so wet. And to have a period of relative dry means that not only can you garden and get on with things, but also a whole load of plants respond really well. And none more so than here in the dry garden. The irises, which I moved last year, are flowering gloriously, but the stars of this border at the moment are the Eramuris, the foxtail lilies. This is Himalaicus, and I love these great spires of flower that catch the light and for a few weeks are the most spectacular thing in the garden. Now, all these plants need good drainage and not too much moisture to thrive. Well, the good drainage I've done my best to provide. And the not too much moisture is courtesy of the weather. Come on, let's go, come on. On today's programme, Carol Klein will be celebrating the plant that she thinks sums up the month of May. Nick Bailey is investigating a plant that has become a menace in some parts of the country. And we revisit Adam Frost's garden as he starts to plant his brand new and very ambitious herbaceous border. My cannas and dahlias have been hardening off here for a couple of weeks. They are now ready to go into the garden. In fact, they need to, because they're exhausting the goodness in the pots. And the garden is ready for them. So the sooner I get them into the ground, the sooner they can start growing healthily. So that's really the next big job. Nice one here. That can go in there. You all right, Nelly? Good girl. I don't know if you can see, but these have been touched by frost. It doesn't look great, but it won't have harmed the plant. I'm not worried about that. The borders are pretty crammed at the moment. It doesn't look like there's room for much at all, let alone whopping great dahlias and cannas. But I have created space in amongst the alliums. And also, it's really important when you're building a border across the seasons to keep the colour coming, to make sure there is a constant display. And that means planting ahead. So while one lot's looking good, another is growing up through them. This is a canna called Wyoming, which has got rich plum-coloured foliage and orange flowers. Because it's been overwintered in leaf mould, it's a little bit green and anemic, and you can see the slugs have been eating it. But when I get it into our rich soil, that will darken up and grow much more strongly. I'm going to pop this one there. Now, this is where having size 11 feet and not the attributes of a dancer doesn't work well for me. I just have to be very careful and do as little collateral damage as I can. Wyoming will grow about 6 foot tall. It's a big, dramatic plant. But if you're growing it on poor soil, then you will need to beef it up and perhaps give it a weekly feed, something like liquid seaweed, because you want it to perform to its best. You want it to be big and bold. I've chosen the dahlia, David Howard, specifically to go with these cannas. You've got the dark foliage and the orange flowers, so you get that repeated motif. That's probably about 3 years old. A nice, healthy plant. In you go. Dahlias are much more forgiving. They will give you a good display if your soil is less than perfect. Right, the soil will give them lots and lots of food. But if the weather continues dry, both these plants will struggle, and the canna in particular. So water them in really well. These won't need watering in the border unless we have a real drought. And to put it into context, I've never watered the dual garden in 25 years. But in a container, the dahlias will need a good soak once a week, and the cannas at least twice a week. Now, this is forward planning. Neither of these plants will hit their stride for a couple of months, and they will go on flowering to the first frosts in November. But Carol has been looking each month at a plant that absolutely captures the moment. And now, this is her plant for the month of May.
Oxford Botanic Gardens is the oldest botanic garden in Britain. They hold one of the national collections of euphorbias. With more than 2,000 species, Euphorbiaceae is one of the biggest flowering groups of plants on the planet. It grows on every continent except Antarctica. The common name for euphorbia is the spurge, but it's the 150 or so species which thrive in temperate regions of the world that are of real interest to British gardeners. These are the plants that shine forth with these brilliant beacons, and this is their time, May. Euphorbia was named in honour of Euphorbus, a Greek physician. It takes its common name, spurge, from the Latin expurgare, which means to purge. The characteristic of euphorbias that attracts us and the pollinating insects are these brilliant inflorescences. Most of us refer to them as flowers, but in actual fact, euphorbias have no petals, no sepals, and their flowers are contained in a unique structure called a cyathium. Within each one of these units are the male flowers, of which there may be several, and the female flower. There's only ever one of her. And nectar is produced in glands within this cyathium. In come the pollinating insects. They pollinate the female flower here, and gradually it swells. Inside are the seeds, and as that seed pod ripens and goes brown, on a really, really hot day, the whole thing explodes and disperses it all over the place. One characteristic all euphorbias share is the milky sap that weeps out of the stems when they're cut. The latex is extremely caustic, causing severe irritation and burning. If it gets in the eyes, it can cause blindness. If you get it on your skin or in your eyes, wash it off immediately with clean water. I've abandoned my big gloves because I need a bit more finesse when I'm doing this. And I'm also wearing glasses, both to help me see, but also to protect my eyes. Really important if you're taking euphorbia cuttings to make sure that all your extremities are protected, because this latex will really irritate your skin. From this big, long length of stem, I can probably make 3, possibly 4 cuttings. First of all, I want a piece about 6 inches, 15 centimetres long, and I want to cut above a bud. Yeah, that's fine. It's not bleeding very much, but what I'll do is take off a couple of these bottom leaves too. So I've got a nice clean length of stem. And I'll dip the end of this into some warm water, which will just help heal it over. It's less likely to rot in that case too, and we won't have latex all over the place. So 1 cutting, 2, 3, that's enough, I think, to start with. Now, if you filled your pot with nice gritty compost, it's just nice open compost. It's got quite a lot of loam in it as well. So I'll just shake it down a little bit And all I need to do is insert these cuttings so that about half is under the surface of the compost, and then just take some grit and put it right over the surface of the compost. And that does three things. Stops weeds developing, it'll retain the moisture in there. The third thing that the grit does is to make sure that the cuttings don't rot, because there's all that sharp drainage just around their stems. They'll take several weeks, maybe a few months to take root, and don't start to think about potting them on until you actually see little white roots emerging from the hole in the base of your pot. And then water really well, and that's it, they're done. There's a euphorbia for every aspect and for all sorts of conditions, from shade to full sun, damp to dry, and they're not fussy about soil. An exciting hybrid is Euphorbia pasteuri. It makes an imposing architectural shrub with handsome green leaves with white midribs. It's evergreen, but on the tender side. But if you can give it a sunny, sheltered, south-facing site and good drainage, it will repay you with heads of brown cyathea emitting delicious perfume. Its low-growing habit makes Euphorbia rigida perfect for a rock garden or a bank in full sun. Its pointy grey leaves clothe the stems in a spiral formation. Its cyathea change from bright zingy yellow to orange as they age. Sometimes euphorbias hybridize spontaneously, as is the case with this very glamorous Euphorbia martini. It's the result of a happy marriage between two euphorbias, one from the Iberian Peninsula and the Mediterranean, Euphorbia caraceus, and another, a woodlander, Euphorbia amygdaloides, our own native wood spurge. This means that it's an extremely versatile plant. You can grow it almost anywhere, from full sun to dappled shade. It just shows you how versatile euphorbias can be. And quite frankly, no garden should be without them.
It's nice to see Oxford Botanic Gardens. Beautiful garden. Haven't been there for a couple of years and must go back soon. And did you know that the very first Gardener's World was broadcast 50 years ago from Oxford Botanic Gardens? And also, if you think that euphorbias only come in shades of yellow and green, you couldn't be further from the truth, because we use this euphorbia, Griffithii Fireglow, for its incredible orange intensity at this time of year. They are fabulous plants, and I completely agree with Carol. Every home should have one. About 5 weeks ago, I sowed climbing beans in root trainers. Let's just check the roots. There they are, perfect. They could probably stay there for another few days, but get them in the ground now. They will get away quicker, and I'll have an earlier crop of beans. I've chosen two varieties. There's Necker Gold, and there, as the name suggests, lovely golden yellow-coloured pods. And I've got Blauhilde, which has purple pods. Make a hole. The important thing is to keep the roots straight, so make a hole deep enough. If you haven't sown any climbing beans, either runner or climbing French varieties, don't worry, not too late. You can sow them in plugs and root trainers now. You can sow them direct, and they will grow fine. If you're sowing them direct, sow 2 beans per support, and then weed out the smallest of the 2. That way you can be sure you'll get 1 for each position. And if you don't have a vegetable garden, consider growing them in a border. They add height, they add colour, and with these purple or golden pods, they're a really decorative plant, as well as being delicious. The pond is delivering its delights in waves, like the rest of the garden. So as the Camasias fade away, this amazing viburnum, it's Viburnum plicatum marisii, comes into the fore. And you can see that the blossom is held in layers on the branches, so you get these tiers of flower. And actually, today it's probably at its very best. But what really marks the pond out from the rest of the garden is the lushness that is increasing all the time. And these marginal plants, either in the water or on the water's edge, are part of the delight of the season. But all is not good, because the RHS has put out a warning saying that there is one particular marginal plant, which I've been growing for the last 30 years, for example, and I've got here in the pond, which we should be very careful about. It is potentially causing havoc in the countryside. And Nick Bailey went down to Devon to investigate.
This is Lysochiton americanus, or more commonly known as skunk cabbage, a rather unflattering description for quite a flamboyant, attractive, and dramatic plant. Skunk cabbage is from the arum family, and it gets its name for a very good reason. Its leaves and its flowers have the most repulsive smell. It's sort of a combination of rotting meat and vegetables. But the plant isn't producing that smell just for the hell of it. It's to draw in pollinators. So certain bees and beetles are attracted to that nasty skunk-like smell. And that's why the plant gets its name, the skunk cabbage. It was introduced from the USA over 100 years ago. And it's grown predominantly in marshy, boggy ground, where gardeners wanted to take advantage of its early bright yellow flowers and big exotic-looking foliage. Apart from the unsociable smell, this plant has another problem. It's an alien. From March last year, the EU labelled the skunk cabbage as an invasive species and banned the exchange or sale of it. The reason that the legislation is in place is that skunk cabbage is running amok in our countryside, and it stands a real chance of wiping out native plant species, and it's particularly prolific in waterways and ditches. Skunk cabbages growing in gardens are dropping their seeds into streams and ditches. The seeds float off into the wild, where they germinate, and the plant flourishes. The problem is now so bad that it's in danger of being out of control and overwhelming our landscape. There's even a colony romping away in Snowdonia, where it has no problem thriving, as it has an uncanny ability to thermogenesize, or generate heat, up to 35 degrees, so it can melt its way through ice and flower while the ground is still frozen. Part of the legislation, we'll ignore Brexit for now, states that gardeners who already have it in their garden must ensure it doesn't spread any further. Which is where Michael Pell comes in. He's been growing it in his garden for over 25 years. Pretty lush. Michael, when and why did you first introduce the skunk cabbage to your garden?
It would be 25 years ago, and I planted them because they're such gorgeous plants. Here, I'm able to control this. It's not been a problem at all.
And so, are you happy with them in the garden? Have you got aspirations to get rid of them?
Well, certainly not.
No, so you're still enjoying it?
No. I'll maintain it. But I won't get rid of it. Unless the law comes down on me and says I have to. But...
Now, Michael, the skunk cabbage is all over your garden, but it's particularly effective here, and I guess that's because the soil's so damp, it's humus-rich, it's full of nutrients. As gardeners, we've got a responsibility to prevent it from spreading around.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
And I suppose seedlings like this, removing seedlings, is one way of doing it. The other technique is about preventing the seeds from spreading. Of course, they go up and down watercourses. When do you tend to do that? How do you do that?
As soon as the flower is finished, before it goes to the big pod, as you can see there, come along and cut them off.
So, just removing this at the base, we can see that it's been pollinated. The spath, the yellow bit on the back, has fallen away, so it's at that moment that it's going to start forming seeds. So by taking it away now, we prevent those seeds from developing, I suppose prevent it from escaping any further into the wild. And then these need to be taken away.
Taken away and left to dry before you burn them. Really.
Managing is key. Stopping the plant from going to seed is one way of controlling it. The other is to dig it up. Now, Michael, there's parts of the garden where you want the skunk cabbage, but here you're trying to keep it under control.
We've got enough down here, yeah.
Now, this is a relatively small plant, but already we're struggling to get down into those roots to lift it out.
Down the bottom. Ah, there's some movement. They have to be so careful it doesn't break off.
OK. Let's think. Such a clay soil.
There we are.
Wow, there we go. And look at those roots. They're just incredible. And of course, these are contractile roots, which means it's got that extra survival ability that it can draw itself deep into the soil, which can make a plant like that almost impossible to get rid of, can't it?
Exactly.
Yeah, so really important. And I guess as well, this is the now, just producing little spadix in the centre there, but no seed formed yet. How do you actually sort of eradicate these finally once they're out of the ground?
A compost bag, lay it out in the sun, lay those on the top and let them dry, and then I burn them.
Wow, so that's total eradication.
It's eradication, yes.
I mean, this plant represents a real dichotomy. In the garden, well managed, it's a good plant. But of course, if it escapes into the countryside, it presents a real risk to our native flora.
Just bear in mind the advice we've had and take the RHS's warning. These are potentially going to clog up the waterways of our countryside. So cut them off. And if you've got it in your garden now, do so this weekend. And I will dry these and either put them in the bin to be taken away and disposed of, or burn them. Right, enough of trouble. Let's have some good things. I want to plant more cannas. I've got an aquatic canna, Canna erebus, which I grew in here last year. And I was talking to a canna grower, and he said the truth is you could plant the aquatic canna in a border, and you could plant a border canna in a pond. I thought, well, OK, that's what I'll do this year and see how they turn out. This is the aquatic one, which I've stored over winter in the greenhouse. And the main point of difference to other cannas is the foliage is longer and thinner, and the flowers are less conspicuous. So it's essentially a foliage plant. That's not bad. Right, that's the aquatic canna, Canna erebus. Now, let's try the Wyoming. Now, remember, I planted this in a dual garden. I know it will grow well there. I don't know if it's going to be OK submerged, but by all accounts, it should be fine. Now, the difficult thing is getting a spot where it's not too submerged. Right, that's too deep, so let's put it there. As long as the pot is covered, that's the important thing. OK, well, I stress this is a first for me. This is a genuine experiment. And if it does grow and we get these great big purple foliage with a tall orange flower, that'll be brilliant. That will look really good. Even if you're not planting, it is worth getting in the water and cleaning up a bit, getting rid of the dead leaves and any fallen twigs, or anything that will rot down and increase the fertility of the water. Because although that sounds like a good thing, it's not. The more fertile the water is, the more likely you will have weed and algae. So scoop out as much as you can, but in doing so, be really careful. Move slowly, scoop gently, and whatever you take out, put on the side of the pond and leave it for at least a day. And all that is to protect the wildlife, which of course is most of the reason why you have a pond in the first place. Now, I have to say that this pond and the damp garden around it has been the easiest thing at Longmeadow. We made it 5 years ago, planted it up, and I've hardly touched it ever since. It just does its thing, and it does it beautifully. But if you're a keen gardener, making a new area of a garden is always thrilling. If you're a garden designer, it's thrills plus skills. And Adam Frost has those aplenty. So we're paying the second visit to see how his new herbaceous border is getting along.
Tell you what, I've been so looking forward to this day from the moment I moved in. You know, that idea of having my own herbaceous border. I spent my life sort of creating them, I think, for other people. But to have my own space that I can play in is absolutely brilliant. And we're really now at the stage to start laying out and get planted. I've chosen an area 3 metres by 3 metres just to give you guys at home a sort of a real concept of a smaller space. You know, we go to these gardens and we see these big herbaceous borders, but how do we bring those ideas home? And this is the plan. I'm planting this border up in interweaving layers, using a variety of texture, shapes, colours and edibles. I'm beginning with the key structural plants that sit at the back of the border. I've inherited a pear tree, which is beautiful, but it sits up, it gives this big height along this sort of long, flat border. So the first thing I do is introduce a bit of height at the end, which is my chokeberry. And then you'll see I'm going to work the other plants in around them. Anyway, let's get on with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is work these grasses through the back. And this wonderful Calamagrostis sort of grow up to nearly 1.5, beautiful flower head on it. That's going to give me structure at the back of the border. And the flower head's going to carry on in autumn, but the plant's going to keep its structure right through the winter months. The next layer should be filled with your favourites, the plants you just can't live without. And mine's peonies. And not just because they've got this wonderful flower. It was actually the fact that it's got a lovely little sort of red detail on the stem. The third layer should be those impact plants that you can weave through the border and really add drama. And you know what? That's sometimes a pretty good idea, to have a word in your head about how you want that border to feel. Drama, romantic, cool. But this, Angelica sylvestris ebony. Lovely dark foliage. Flower, 1.5, beautiful pink. Going to work its way back to the front of the border. That's one thing you shouldn't worry about. Every now and then, having a bit of height right at the front really engages people. The fourth layer should be filled with plants that really help knit the border together. I'm going to start to use this Baptisia australis. So the first thing that's going to do is give me a ribbon of blue that works all the way through, which will pull the other plants together, that sort of creams and the darker colours. Work well against the grasses. Beautiful. So after the Baptisia, I'm going to work in these lovely little Echinacea. They work really well, first of all, with that Calamagrostis, that grass. But after that, actually, they hold really well into the winter, so a nice spiked flower that hangs down. So after that Echinacea, we're going to add this little Adrotina. And I suppose what this plant does is it's a companion. It gets the best out of the other plants. But then it grows up to about 1 metre, has a lovely white flower, which works beautifully with the blues and the sort of creamy yellows. So again, sometimes it's not all about the plants that you think are the most beautiful plants in the world. This, for me, actually starts to tie the whole border together. The fifth layer of plants adds stunning detail right across the front of the border. This lovely little grass, Breezia media, which is a native grass. But when it comes up in flowers, they're more or less like little lockets that sort of hang, and the slightest little bit of wind and you get this movement, which will be beautiful through the front of this border. And then this lovely Centuria, which is called Geordie. Fantastic plant, grows to about sort of 600 high, so sit good at the front of the border. But it's the flower. The flower's stunning. And after this flower's finished, the seed head looks really good. So that, again, that gives me that sort of carry-on into the back end of the year. And now we're putting in the final few bits. So Some lovely geraniums to work their way through. What I love about it is this dark splash on the leaf, which really starts to pick up on the other plants, especially Angelica. And last but not least, it's Astrantia. Beautiful sort of paper-like flowers. Pop the last one in, and then they can all go in the ground. When you're planting larger stock, the key is really not to plant it too deep. It's a decent weight, so when it goes in, it'll actually settle down. And there is one plant that won't be going in today, this peony. It looks fantastic, but I actually bought them online bare root through the winter. It started to root, but if I knock this out now and plant it, it'll put this plant under so much stress that actually it might well fail. So they're going to go back in somewhere safe, come out in a few weeks' time. The rest of the plants, to be fair, are all quite straightforward. There it is. Last one. All this needs now, drop of water, and they'll be away. They're herbaceous, they'll just put on loads of growth. But you might have noticed I've left a few little gaps because I want to put a twist on it. And that twist is going to be edibles. I want you to walk along this border, see these beautiful plants, but then all of a sudden have something that actually you can enjoy and you can take to the table. On top of that, summer bulbs to go through, and actually a few little sort of self-seeding plants that work through the back just to make the whole thing feel quite natural. But that's all for another day.
Whilst, of course, I, like everybody else, want to see how that border develops, what I find really fascinating is seeing a top designer at work on his own garden. But the real excitement, however you go about it, is seeing the garden grow and develop, and we will all share that with Adam's garden as it gets into its stride. Now, we've got lots more to come on tonight's programme. Mark Lane visits a community garden with a very unusual history. And Rachel de Tame goes to Ramster Hall, which is famed for its fantastic display of rhododendrons and azaleas. But, first of all, we have our Golden Jubilee plant. This is the last of the 10 that we've put forward. And this week, it is Carol's turn.
Cranesbills, hardy geraniums, have seen their star in the ascendant over the last 50 years. Geranium Roseanne burst on the scene in the early years of this century, and what an impact she made. She flowers from May till October. What flowers too! Great big chalices of sumptuous blue with white centres over beautifully marked foliage. She's a buxom beauty. She grows at least a metre in every direction, and she'll grow absolutely anywhere, from dappled shade to full sun. You don't even need a garden to grow her. She's really happy in a container. She's definitely my Golden Jubilee plant.
If you agree with Carol that that particular geranium is the most influential plant in the last 50 years, well, very soon you will be able to express that opinion, because all 10 of our possible plants have been put forward, and you can vote. And we'll be announcing the winner at Gardeners World Live, and we'll be telling you how you go about voting later on in the programme. Now, Mark Lane is in London, visiting a National Trust house with a garden that is, at the very least, unexpected.
I'm in Hackney, East London, and this is Sutton House, which dates back to the Tudor times and is owned by the National Trust. I've been wanting to come here for a long time, and I'm really, really excited. Now, from the outside, it looks just like a normal Tudor house, but if I go through to the garden, I know I'm in for a surprise. Named the Breakers Yard because it was a car breakers yard from the 1920s right up to the 1990s. It was transformed into a modern garden space in 2015 by Daniel Lobb. Daniel, this is such an amazing space. I mean, it's not really what you would expect from a Tudor house, is it really?
No, absolutely. It's quite a contrast. You know, part of the brief was to create something that referenced the 20th century history of the site. It was formerly a car breakers yard. So that elements of using vehicles and metal and rusty metal around. The National Trust went out to the local community and asked what they would like in this space. And overwhelmingly, the thought came back to reflect the breakers yard history of the site. There are echoes of the Tudor history, you know, from the bricks that have been used with the herringbone pattern, and even the tyres themselves with the chevron tread reflecting back to the herringbone brick. So there's little echoes here and there of the Tudor part.
So, I mean, you've packed a lot in. You've used vehicles to break up the space. Where have they come from?
So there are two main vehicles in the garden. One's this double-decker caravan. The exterior is loosely modelled on a boat with a balcony on the front and a small one on the back. And the interior is modelled on a stately home. So there's a chandelier in there and a Adams-style fireplace.
Great idea. Can you tell me something about this vehicle?
It's a 1980s coach. I found it on the internet, actually. It was formerly used for Royal Staff transport from Horse Guards Parade to Buckingham Palace. So it had very low mileage. But we've repurposed it into a greenhouse for the garden. So.
What a brilliant idea. Can you tell me what the place was like before you took it over?
When I was first appointed, the site was very overgrown, quite neglected. Lots of self-sown buddleias and sycamores coming up. Generally quite overgrown and unkempt. The ground is quite badly contaminated, down to a depth of 6 or 7 metres. Various heavy metals, waste engine oil. As a solution for this, we were recommended to install an impermeable membrane over the entire site. And that means that all of the surface water has to be dealt with above, and all of the planting is in containers.
So where does all the water go?
We formed the rill, which collects all of the surface water. Also, there are very large rainwater storage tanks.
I saw those.
And they have a sedum roof, so the water filters through the sedum into the tanks, and then it's pumped by children when they come and use the space. There are little hand pumps, so that water can then be discharged into the rill.
It's an incredible space, a feast for the eyes, and I just want to go and explore.
Yeah, let's do that.
I noticed there are a lot of planters in the garden. This is a brilliant idea, isn't it?
It's a repurposed car trailer. It's a good height for a raised bed.
It's a brilliant height for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And good depth of soil in there for the planting.
It is. It's a lovely mix. We've got thyme, we've got sages, we've got oregano, and then right next to it, we've got this wonderful thing, which is like, I assume it's like bug health. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a tool chest from the back of a pickup truck, which we've repurposed into a bug habitat.
And of course, who cannot notice this beautiful indigo pharaoh? I wish I could grow this at home, but of course, it's quite tender, isn't it?
It is.
So there's this wonderful microclimate, I would imagine.
That's the benefit of being in the city, I think, that we can get away with growing things that are a little bit more tender.
And of course, there's some underplanting as well, isn't there?
Yes, we've got Haconocloa under there, the deciduous grass. It's all planted within a tyre, and the planting seems to thrive in these tyres. I think because of the shape, creates a little dish in the base of the tyre to retain some moisture in there.
That's a really good tip. And what a real novel idea, this mini orchard. What sort of trees have we actually got here, Daniel?
They're all varieties of apple that are local to the southeast of England. They're grown on dwarfing rootstock, so they won't get too big in these containers.
And then right to my left is a lovely specimen. That's Magnolia grandiflora?
It is, yeah, chosen there because in the winter, when the deciduous apples lose their leaves, we've got some evergreen against the building here, and the underside of the magnolia leaf picking up some of the tone and colour within the brickwork.
That's very, very clever. And in front of us are these wonderful specimens right inside these really big tyres.
The Camarops humilis palm was an introduction to this area. It first came into the country to Hackney in the 19th century. And the other large specimen plants are yew and box, grown as topiary pyramids, again referencing that Tudor history.
This place isn't just about designer planting, it's about people. They have all sorts of local visitors, from preschool children to the group calling themselves the Recycled Teenagers. You can actually sow them onto sand, but you can also sow them onto a seed compost. A lot of rain every single day. They'll need a lot of moisture and heat.
Drown the poor little things, you know. I'm thinking before they even start going, you know. And you feed them.
This is such an amazing space. About. And what I love the most is that right from the start of this project, the community has been involved. So it doesn't just reflect the community, it also benefits them, and it will do for years to come. So who could imagine that a yard of old cars could turn into such a beautiful garden like this?
What's so fabulous about that garden is that it's got such energy. There's a real sense of dynamism, and I love the recycling. Of course, we recycle here a lot. The shed behind is all using old tin and old windows. In fact, we try and incorporate as many found objects as we possibly can. So, did you hear the cuckoo? Listen. All right. Now, I'm cutting back this rocket. I'm cutting it because it's going to seed like mad. You can see that it's nearly all stem. The flowers are desperate to form, and that means that there's far fewer leaves. The leaves that are there are tougher, they're less sweet, they're much hotter. So what I do is cut it now, and then I'll do another sowing in July and August, and we can start the cycle again in late summer and autumn. Come on. Come on. I think one of the best ways of learning about gardens and getting inspiration for your own garden is to visit as many as you can. And this is the 90th year of the National Garden Scheme. And the beauty of it means that you can visit gardens of every kind, from the smallest to the grandest. And very often within quite a small area, you can visit a number in an afternoon. And some of these gardens have been open for a long time. Rachel has been to visit one of them.
Ramster Hall in Chiddingfold. A 20-acre woodland garden blessed with a wonderful canopy of oaks, larches and conifers, under which flowering shrubs flourish. It's a garden laden with Eastern influence. Explosions of rhododendrons and azaleas at every turn.
It's one of only 2 gardens that have opened every year under the National Garden Scheme since it started back in 1927. And the other garden is Sandringham. So Ramster Hall really is in excellent company.
Miranda Gunn and her family have owned Ramster Hall since that very first opening, when Miranda's grandmother, Lady Fay Norman, welcomed NGS visitors to her garden.
My grandmother had been brought up at Bodden Gardens, so she was really keen on having a rhododendron garden, and she loved this garden. She planted a lot of the famous Loderi rhododendrons, and then she introduced a lot of the azaleas for the azalea garden.
So what are some of your earliest memories of the garden being open for the NGS?
My grandmother was a slightly formidable lady, very well known locally, and she always wore a large straw hat, and she used to love NGS open days, and we would, grandchildren would be following behind her, and she'd go up to every visitor and she'd say, "So glad to see you going round the garden." And then she'd proceed to tell them all the names of the Latin plants and things like that, and the poor visitors would be absolutely tongue-tied and petrified and couldn't wait to scuttle behind the nearest bush. And us grandchildren used to look and see that the more savvy visitors would take diversionary tactics when they saw her straw hat coming down the path. In the days when we only used to open for the NGS, then it was a great challenge to get it all up and running. I think one of the funniest things that we ever had was one day we were sitting having lunch and the neighbouring farmer came by and looked through the window and said, "Oh, I've lost 23 heifers. Have anybody seen them?" Of course, that set panic, and we had a real old rodeo trying to roam them all up and get them under control before the garden opened.
So it sounds like they're adventures, always the unexpected.
Always the unexpected happens when you're dealing with the garden open days, yes.
I think people who want to open their garden for the NGS, I mean, they get so much pleasure out of sharing the garden with visitors.
You're so right. I think one of the joys of this garden is sharing it with people. It's still a great honour to open for the National Garden Scheme.
And what a treat lies in store for those visiting this magical place. As many as 1,000 rhododendrons grow here, 500 varieties, and up to 80 species. Rama Lopez Rivera is one of the gardeners and a rhododendron expert.
So talk me through the collection here. I mean, Ramster Hall isn't that well known, is it?
No, it's really gone under the radar for the last 80 years, probably. It's been a low-key garden, but that's been part of its charm. You start off at the front of the garden, we'll enter the azalea garden. Furume azaleas you get from southern Japan. We have the Loderi collection here. Large blooms of heavily scented flowers, and a cross of Griffithii and Fortunii. We go up into Ant Wood, which is our collection of hardy hybrids. The old world rhododendron, really a range of flower types and colours. Excellent forms. A little slice of Asia in Surrey.
Rhododendrons are often traditionally known for their grand stature. But Rama is currently working on an exciting project to develop more compact varieties for even the smallest of gardens.
We've got things like the azaleas here that like full sun, they don't need shade requirements, they look great in a pot at the front of a border. So, you know, really versatile as a plant.
Oh, and that colour there.
This one, Graziella, excellent plant. Luxurious foliage, linear leaves. It has an excellent flower colour set against the almost glaucous green of the foliage.
That's a stunner.
This is going to grow after 10 years to 1 metre around.
And it could go in a pot.
It could go in a pot, and that's going to restrict the size also, avoid chalky soil. So anything above 7 on the pH scale is something you want to try and stay away from.
And is there a better time of year to plant them?
The best time for rhododendrons is autumn. Plant them in autumn, the soil temperature of the ground still has the heat from the summer, so when they're planted, the roots still have growing time before the winter sets in.
I love what you're doing in this area because you've got all this richness of the history of the rhododendrons at Ramster Hall, and now you're taking them forward, making them relevant for the 21st century.
It's a fantastic opportunity, and to be able to share my passion and knowledge of this genus for the public to come and see in Ramster Gardens. What an excellent place.
You're here for life, aren't you?
Absolutely.
seeing rhododendrons in flower on that scale is always an incredibly dramatic, rather awe-inspiring thing. I mean, if you want to experience either Ramsden or any of the gardens open in your area, do go along. And the National Garden Scheme is having a big celebration over the bank holiday weekend. For details on that, you can go to our website. Now, one of the features of Ramsden is that it has ericaceous soil, so it can grow all those amazing azaleas and rhododendrons. And I've tried to grow Meconopsis, which tends to prefer ericaceous soils, for the last 30 years and failed dismally. And these now are in their third year, which may not sound a lot to you, but it's a triumph for me, because to have them regrowing and flowering is something that I've wanted in my garden most of my life. There's very little else that has that intensity of blue that you'll find at any time of year, let alone now. And the key to growing these, as well as having a slightly ericaceous soil, is to keep them moist in summer, moist and cool. And that doesn't mean wet at their roots, but having the air moist. And last summer, when we had a dry spell, I misted them. And I did that every day. And I think that helps. And you can see how they're covered in these little hairs on the stem and on the foliage, and it holds the droplets of water, like little crystalline jewels. Now, moist air is by and large beyond our control. It's down to the weather. So, let's see what the weather holds in store for us gardeners this weekend.
Good evening. Some parts of the country have certainly seen their fair share of moisture this last week. In fact, there's been a lot of rain in places, much needed rain at that, down across parts of the southeast of England. 55 millimetres of rain has fallen over the last few days, over 2 inches. Not much of that rain, though, has reached the north of Scotland. That's going to change a bit through the weekend. All of us seeing some rain at times on Saturday, quite a showery day, some sunny spells as well. And then if you are heading out into the garden, maybe to sort out the pond, Sunday should be a dry day for many. But let's pick up the story on Saturday, and you can see a lot of showers flinging their way across the country and across the northern half of Scotland. Well, here it's going to be quite a cloudy afternoon with some outbreaks of rain. Some of that rain could be on the heavy side. Across Northern Ireland into Northern England and the Midlands, lots of showers, some of them heavy, possibly thundery. It may well be that parts of East Anglia and the southeast don't see so many showers, more in the way of dry weather. But across Wales, down towards the southwest, some pretty hefty showers moving their way through. Now, most of those showers will fade away on Saturday evening. Saturday night will be a fairly chilly one. I think most places should avoid a frost. In very, very prone spots, I couldn't completely rule it out. If you're out and about in the garden on Sunday, though, maybe planting up those hanging baskets, a nice day for it. Some good spells of sunshine, a bit more cloud into Northern Ireland and Western Scotland, maybe some patchy rain here. But in the best of the sunshine in the southeast, temperatures will get to 20 degrees.
Well, for most of us, we are moving into a warmer time of year. But a lot of us got hit by frost 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was actually away. And when I left, this magnolia, black tulip, was looking great. The flowers were just opening, it was healthy. And when I came back, it was reduced to this, tatters and rags. And of course, spring frosts do that. You've got lush growth, you get a touch of frost, and they are really affected. Now, people have asked what to do about it, and the answer is not much. Don't get the secateurs out and cut it all off. Let new growth come through, and then you can tidy it up a bit. But go steady. Let the plants shed their leaves if you can, because there is a risk of damaging other tissue. But if it's any help, it looks much worse than it is. There's nothing much you can do about it. However, there are things you can do, and here are some jobs for the weekend. If you're taking cuttings, check to see if they've rooted. And if you see the roots at the base of the pot, then it's time to pot them on. Carefully remove them so you do as little damage to the roots as possible. And give each cutting its own new pot with fresh compost. Then put them somewhere protected to grow on, and they'll be ready to plant out in a month or two. If you grow tulips in a nice terracotta pot, it can be frustrating as the foliage slowly dies back. What I do is tip them out of the pot and put the tulips into a seed tray. These can go somewhere dry and light so that the little baby daughter bulbs can absorb all that photosynthesized goodness. In the meantime, give the pot a scrub and it's ready for immediate use. Although broad beans grow strongly, they can be bashed about by the wind and the rain. So give them some support. And the best way to do this is put canes or sticks in the corners of the rows and wrap a layer of string around. And then you can add as many layers as are needed as the beans grow taller. I probably don't need to remind you by now that this is our Golden Jubilee year. And as part of the celebrations, we have chosen the 10 plants that we, the Gardener's World presenters, think have had the most impact on our gardens during those 50 years. Well, the time has come for you to choose which of those 10 is the one plant that has influenced us most. Now, let me remind you what those 10 were. I started things off back in March by choosing bedding plants, and then it was Nick Bailey's turn and he nominated dahlias. Rachel chose Aquilegia vulgaris, whereas Mark Lane selected Echinacea. Joe Swift selected Stipa gigantea. Chilies were championed by Francis Tophill, and Flo Headlam opted for the common jasmine. It was the Japanese maple for Alan Power, Adam Frost's pick was the rose, and finally, Geranium Roseanne was Carol's Jubilee plant. If you go to our website and look for our Golden Jubilee Plant Award, you can make your selection now, and it will be open until midnight on Sunday, May the 21st. And then we'll be announcing the winner of our Golden Jubilee Plant Award at our big celebratory bash at Gardeners World Live on June the 16th. But no more celebrations today, I'm afraid. We've run out of time. And I shan't be here next week because all next week, along with the rest of the team, I shall be at Chelsea. So I hope I'll see you there and back here at Longmeadow in a couple of weeks' time. Till then, bye-bye. Come on, dogs. Come on.
Witnessing a stunning seasonal blanket of pink cherry blossom, Spring Watch in Japan is available now on BBC iPlayer. Listening at doors and even looking through eye holes in paintings, King Louis's paranoia knows no bounds at Versailles. Next on BBC Two.